All right, so this week's Torah portion talks a little bit about scales and weights, and we're going to get into that and what we can learn from it in this lesson today. So, first of all, if we take a look around us at the world, at the educational institutions, especially in the United States, we'll see that there's a lot of fancy buildings and colleges have these huge organizations with these beautiful campuses and billions of dollars put into it. And it seems like it's a very noble thing to do, to put money into such an organization, right? Now, if we put that aside and we take a look around us at yeshivas or Jewish institutions, we'll notice that none of them come at all close to Johns Hopkins University or things like that, right? There is a little bit of a disproportionate, but you'll also notice that the names on most of the colleges and most of the fancy educational facilities and museums and art are Cohen and Weinberg and Bloomstein on a lot of these buildings, right? So Jews are very philanthropic and they give a lot of money, but many times you'll see that it's mostly given to institution to, oh wait, one second. I'm sorry, guys. So I'm just pointing out that little tidbit for you to keep in mind, and we're gonna get to it in a minute. And let's look first at the first text that we have, okay? So the picture that you have on the screen here is a picture of kind of scales, a little old-fashioned scale system. And like I said earlier, sometimes you learn these, in every Torah portion and in the Torah in general, you can learn practical laws that you can apply to our modern day life. But sometimes you don't notice it. You have to kind of understand what it is that you're reading. Sometimes the laws that we're learning is packed in old-fashioned terminology or old-fashioned examples that you might not realize right away you can pertain it to your life in such a practical way. So this week we're going to talk about the scales, the scale system that they used to have in the olden days, and how it worked was they didn't necessarily have a scale even like the one you see on the screen. Sometimes they had just like a system. For example, if I needed to sell you a pound of bread, oh no, that's not a pound of meat or 2 pounds of meat, whatever it is, I would take a rock that I already know weighs 2 pounds based on a previous assessment, and I'll put the rock and I'll feel it, and then I'll put the meat and I'll kind of base it off of how much the rock weighs. So you may have a person in those days that would be weighing something would have different items weighing different amounts, and that's how they would check how much it was, how much weight it was, the item, that they were selling you, okay? So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. So just like nowadays, it's easy to tamper a little bit with scales, with how much things cost, with the weight of something. You can kind of shave off a little bit here, shave off a little bit there. In those days as well, if they wanted to cheat someone, they would take a smaller weighing stone and pretend it was really 2 pounds, and really it was 1 pound, and then they would only weigh the meat against the 1 pound and be like, here's your 2 pounds of meat, when really they were selling you 1 pound, etc. Obviously, cheating is forbidden, and this is not allowed. So there is, in fact, we all know, a prohibition in Torah against not stealing from someone. But in this, even more than having a prohibition against stealing, the Torah actually has a specific mitzvah that prohibits even mismeasuring something or even owning measurements that are incorrect. That's how seriously the Torah takes us. So let's look ahead and see a little more. Hold on. Yeah, move to the next screen. Here is your favorite lady looking at her shoes. Okay, let's look a little further at text 1a. And here we don't have. Yeah. Okay. You should not keep in your pouch 2 different weights, 1 large and 1 small. You should not keep in your house 2 different measures, 1 large and 1 small. Rather, you should have a full and honest weight and a full and honest measure, in order that your days be prolonged on the land which the Lord your God gives you. For whoever does these things and whoever perpetuates such injustice, it is an abomination to the Lord your God, right? So basically exactly what I just said, that's what we're reading right here. Okay, the next pasuk in the Torah starts on a completely different subject. And what does it tell us about? You shall remember what Amalek did to you on the way. Amalek is the name of an enemy of the Jews, another nation, when you went out of Egypt. how he happened upon you on the way and cut off all the stragglers at your rear when you were faint and weary, and he did not fear God. Therefore, it will be when the Lord your God grants you respite from your enemies around you in the land which the Lord your God gives to you as an inheritance to possess. You shall obliterate the remembrance of Amalek from beneath the heavens, and you should not forget them. Two completely different narratives right next to each other, okay? One is just law, civil law. You shouldn't cheat. You shouldn't have two separate kinds of weights. And the second one is talks about a very infamous enemy that we have. Why does one follow right after the other? Now, we discussed many times in our classes that everything in Torah has a reason. And if the Torah places one story right next to another story, there's a reason for it. Why would we put these two together? What is the connection between cheating on weights and the enemy called Amalek? Just as a little background, for those of you that are not familiar, Amalek was the first nation after the Jews left Egypt. The Jews were on a high. Everybody believed in the amazingness of God after all the miracles that he did. Nobody was going to mess with the Jews. Everybody was going to be scared of them, respect them, stay far, give them their space. Amalek came, they were the first ones, and they attacked the Jews. They kind of led the way for everyone else to be like, oh, it's not so scary. And they've done other things since then, and there's a lot of laws about erasing them out, and they represent the epitome of evil, and we'll get to that a little bit further. So right now we want to understand what is the connection between not having weights that are dishonest and the measurements incorrect and Amalek, okay? So the next passage tells us, you shall remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you went out of Egypt, which is what I just told you. Wait, no, we just read that. Hold on, sorry. Okay. You shall remember what Amalek did to you. The juxtaposition of these passages teaches us that if you use fraudulent measures and weights, you should be worried about provocation from the enemy. As the verse tells us, deceitful scales are an abomination of God. After which the next verse continues, when you are willfully wicked, then comes disgrace. So Rashi, who always gives explanations on the pasuk, he comes and says, you know what? The second one is a consequence of the first. If you are not honest and you're not honest in your business and you fail to have honest business practices, especially if you use dishonest measurements and weights, you make yourself vulnerable to the enemy. Okay, now this is getting a little bit more interesting. Why? Why would being dishonest lead to an attack by the nation of Amalek? Why this nation out of all people? What is the connection between stealing, right, being dishonest and theft from your customers or whatever, and a nation coming to attack you? Why would one be a consequence of the other? Like I said earlier, everything in Torah has a reason. So if these specific stories were put together and this specific nation and this specific issue comes as a consequence of the weight, there's got to be a deep connection there, right? Okay, so first of all, we know that the nation of Amalek is unusually evil. We know that there's very harsh laws on the destruction of this nation. King Shaul was commanded to erase them off the earth. They are a people that are at the very depth, unusually evil. So we know that there are messages and lessons from this people that run a little bit deeper. Let's see what the connection is here. Okay, like the next text here just tells us that it shows us again how they are a particularly evil nation. Because here in this text, it tells us the other nations, when at the end of time, when Mashiach comes, the other nations are still going to exist, but this nation Amalek specifically not. So there's obviously something about them that is they represent something more extreme than other nations. So let's move ahead and see what that is and how it would connect to this concept of faulty scales, okay? So at the end of this, what is called section 1, we're left with this main question that we have right here. How does a few faulty scales warrant an attack by the nation of Amalek? What is the underlying connection between the two? Okay, if Amalek is such a bad nation that we're meant to erase them and get rid of them and like remember always the evil that they did, the sin of scales doesn't seem as intensely evil. It's not good, it's not honest, but it doesn't seem as intensely evil. So what is it about the sin of the scales that equals in its depth and in its intensity the behavior of Amalek? So right now, in the next section, we're going to have two approaches to answering this question. Okay, I know Corey's gonna resonate with this, but so in order to understand the connection between the two, we need to really understand the gravity of the crime. What is the gravity of being a little dishonest, shaving off a little bit here, cheating a little bit with an ounce here and an ounce there? So the first approach to that would be an approach called, it's called Musar, but it basically, we're going to really understand what is the mindset of someone that uses fake, fraudulent weights and how exactly they operate, right? So let's look at text 4 first. Okay. This is actually said by King Shaul in Proverbs, and he says, diverse weights and diverse measures, even both are an abomination of God, okay? So, sounds nice. It sounds like we're just reiterating what we just said, but if you read it again, it seems to be talking about something a little bit more, because it says, Gam Shnehem, even both of them. Why did we need to add that? I mean, obviously, if you're saying two different weights, and two different measures are dishonest, you mean both of them. Why does it need to emphasize even both of them are an abomination of God? So let's look at the next one so we can better understand this. And here we go. The explanation of the matter lies in the words of King Solomon. Okay, diverse weights and diverse measures, even both are an abomination of God. If they are both false, why does it need to make a state that they're both an abomination? Why would anyone make a distinction between them? And what does even both mean? Rather, he must be speaking of someone holding on to one false weight and one true weight. What does he do? And he goes and weighs for some people using the false weight, the little one, and for some people he uses the larger regular weight. So, like, meaning he's honest with some customers and he's dishonest with other customers, right? So if someone goes to the courthouse and he's like, hey, the guy in the meat store, he is underweighing my food. He's not being honest. So this owner can claim to the courts, hey, ask Tiki and Corey and Stephanie, check their weights. They're going to see that I sold them honest weights and I weighted it correctly. And they're going to tell you that nothing was missing. And that's true. Since I'm reading now from the text, since these will refute the accusation, the judge will naturally say to the complainers, hey, maybe it's your fault that it was not weighted properly. Maybe you shaved off a little bit once you got it, because why would he be honest with some people and then dishonest with you? Why other customers is he not cheating and all of a sudden you think he's cheating you, right? And then when the court says, but just to be sure, send me your weight, your little rock or whatever, he's obviously going to send the honest one, right? So it emerges that if not for the proper weight, he would not be able to sell to anyone with the smaller one. So which means without the honest little rock or whatever you want to call it, he would not have been able to be dishonest because nobody would believe him. So the honest one actually is helping him lie and cheat with the other people, right? So going back to the text, this is why he maintains the proper one, to present the falsehood as the truth. This is why even the proper weight is an abomination to God, because it refers to the weighing properly as well, because it too is an abomination because you're only doing it in order to fool the world, right? You're using this honest weight in order to be able to cheat all the rest of your customers so that you can be believed. And that is why King Solomon specifically writes, both are an abomination, to include also the proper weight, okay? So this explains the juxtaposition of these laws. This is his answer. Remember what Amalek did to you, because it is difficult to understand what an enemy attack has to do with weights. Did Amalek come and attack the Israelites because they were using false weights? Rather, that large proper weights are referred to as deceitful scales when one uses them in order to deceive, as explained above. One who uses them to weigh conceals his wickedness from the public eye and pretends that the heavenly eye cannot see. He's like, all right, I'm going to use some honest ones and some dishonest ones because nobody can tell, and I'll be able to fool everyone, God included, right? This is the way of the Holy One, blessed be he. He tells the cheaters, you have stolen and cheated in secret. The Holy One, blessed be he, will send your enemy to take all that you have in the open. So what this explanation is really telling us is that it's kind of more of an elaborate deception than we thought. It's not like a regular thief or regular theft. This one you need to do in public, right? You're stealing while the customer is standing right in front of you. So you kind of have to be professional. You kind of have to be smooth about it. You have to be honest with some and then cheat the other one. Pull out the honest one when you need to, then pull out the fake weight when you need to. So this will only work if sometimes you're really honest. Got to be smooth about it, right? So the honesty that you're doing is only to enable your lies, right? But still, obviously, it is deception. And it's not only deception, it's like professional deception. You have to fool everybody at the same time. Now, think about it like this. This man obviously thinks that he can fool God because he's basically like, God's not supervising everything I do. He doesn't know what I do. A little smooth movement here and smooth movement there. And yeah, I got this, I can get away with it. This kind of is worse than being openly evil, because openly evil, you know what you're dealing with. When someone's like outwardly nasty, or someone is dealing with you in outwardly a rude way, or you just cut it off. You're like, I'm done. I'm not dealing with this, right? But when someone is sort of nice, kind of nice, you're not really sure. Those are the trickier ones, kind of like politicians who act like they're friends of the Jews, or they have our best interests at heart, and they say all the right things and they do all the right things, when in reality what they're doing in practice doesn't necessarily represent that, right? And it happens with regular people as well, not only politicians. So those are like the more sophisticated, dangerous ones. The writer James Baldwin once made a similar observation of the anti-Black racism in America. He said that racism in the Jim Crow era in the South was advertised, separate fountains, separate buses, all kinds of things like that. But when you went to the North, it seemed like they were much more accepting, but in reality, they just covered it up better. Like maybe they didn't divide the children according to law in the schools, but the societal norms and the banking practices made it very difficult for Black families to move into predominantly white school districts. So the results might be the same, but they just covered it up in a more sophisticated manner, right? So he actually writes in his book, I know Negroes who prefer the South and the white Southerners because at least you know what you're dealing with. So when someone cheats and uses these weights and this dishonest weights, when they're performing evil like in private, God makes sure that they're eventually going to be exposed. Okay, you think you can hide from me? You think you can do these tricks? No one's going to notice. We're going to notice. I see everything that's going on. And he sends the exact opposite of those that hide. Who is that? That's the concept of the nation of Amalek. Amalek came out all in the open, and they were like, guys, you think this nation is so awesome? This God doesn't exist. This is like, no way. We hate the Jews. We're just going to attack them. They were like full on public, no secrets, all out there, which is exactly the opposite of this behavior with the weights. Okay. So that's why he says this is the connection, the punishment to the crime. You were hiding in secret. You thought no one was going to notice. I'll send a public attack that's going to show you I know exactly what's going on. Okay. And we're getting closer to the part that pulls it all together. That's really resonates. So if we look at the next one, text 7. Okay. I skipped text 6 because we just discussed it. Text 7 here. This measure supports our thesis. For everything the Jewish people did with subterfuge, Amalek came openly to bring their shame to light. For the Holy One, blessed be he, does not punish without justice. He always has an equal balance. So when he sends the enemy to take what is yours, certainly it is because in secret you oppressed and acted with perversion. On account of this, Amalek came, as the verse states, because of their testing God, saying, is God not in our midst? Because the Jews were kind of questioning if Hashem existed or not. Is he really there? Does he know what we're doing? Then Amalek came. They did not trust that Hashem would provide for all their needs, so therefore they turned to cheating instead, to profit illegally and to act as if heaven could not see. Okay, so in the summary, this explanation is answering that The explanation is actually called a kliyakar. He says, having imperfect faith in God and divine providence, meaning you don't really fully believe that Hashem is in charge of everything. Therefore, you decide you need to kind of be a little deceptive and figure it out on your own. Therefore, the attack by Amalek comes as a result of that. Okay, we're going to move on to another further digging into there. Okay, this is just deception hidden in plain sight is brazen and worse than the obvious cheat. All right, so the next one comes along. Amalek openly brings to light the lack of faith that the Jews may have had. Text number 8. Okay, so here he's also going to try to come up with a connection between the cheating of the weights and the attack of Amalek, right? So he says, our sages have taught that the most severe sins are those of, I don't know how to pronounce that, idolatry and murder. The severity of these three, however,
Licentiousness.
say it again?
Licentiousness.
Thank you. Idolatry and murder. The severity of these three, however, is not connected to their punishment. After all, for desecrating the Shabbos is more severe, the punishment for desecrating the Shabbos is more severe than the punishment for sexual crimes. Rather, they are considered cardinal sins, because one who sins will sin in one of three basic ways: out of a lack of faith in God and his Torah, out of desire or inordinate anger, or another character trait relevant to social interaction. The archetype of lack of faith is idolatry. The archetype of illicit desire is licentiousness, and the archetype of negative character traits is murder. Okay, wait. Every sin comes in these three forms. Desecration of the Shabbos for the sake of one's livelihood is a matter of faith, and thus is a shade of idolatry. If one does so for pure personal benefit, then it is an offshoot of licentiousness. Now, the worst of these sins is idolatry, since it concerns faith, and the possibility for repentance is remote. So what this is talking about is there's something called the three cardinal sins, right? And the three cardinal sins are not considered cardinal sins because they have a huge punishment, but more about the essence of where they come from. So these three cardinal sins are called that because they represent faithlessness, I do not believe, and therefore I am doing this, bad character, or intense desire. So we already discussed earlier how the sin of the scales really shows faithlessness, right? Because it shows an absence of faith in God, who sees and knows everything. You're like, I don't think he sees what I'm doing. If I'm sneaky enough and smooth enough, I believe I can get away with this, right? It also shows, and this is something we can all apply to, it displays a disbelief that it is possible to maintain a livelihood and have all our needs taken care of in an honest way. Meaning, if someone is struggling and they're not being able to make a livelihood and are trying really hard, if they don't believe deep down that God is in control and he's going to be able to help you do it in an honest way, you might say, you know what, this isn't working. I'm just going to cheat the system a bit. I got to help this out. It's just not working for me, right? So ultimately, when someone is cheating for a livelihood, it shows, like cheating with weights and stuff, it shows a weakness in your belief that God can help and that God can provide for you, and therefore you need to get involved in a dishonest way. So let's go back and again and see the connection here. I'm going to pull it all together. Okay, I think the next text. Remember that which Amalek did to you. By placing this text next to the previous subject, it is apparent that Amalek comes on the account of the sins of the weights. This is mystifying, since in the desert there was little opportunity for merchandise for which they would need measurement or weights. However, this matter can be understood by contemplating why our sages have so deplored the sin of weights, to the extent that they have said that the sin of weights is greater than that of licentiousness. Why should it be more severe than any other kind of thievery? Now, when one steals some precious item from someone else, it might be as a result of his desire for that object, in which case it falls in the category of licentiousness. However, one who makes false weights does not generally do so out of desire, but out of lack of faith in God, who through divine providence nourishes and sustains every creature in accordance with its deeds. Therefore, this sin is actually in the category of idolatry. Therefore, they have said that the sin of the scales, although it is only an offshoot of idolatry and is yet far from the chief sin of apostasy, nevertheless is more severe than licentiousness, the chief sin of immodest desire. Because a lack of faith is very hard to correct. When you just have a desire and you give in to that desire, that's a mistake or something that people do, and you can correct it and move on from it. But yet, when you have a lack of faith, it's much harder to work on that. With this, we can return to the Torah portion of Amalek, which is introduced by the words, is God in our midst or not? That was the question that the Jews had in the desert before Amalek came to them, right? And then Amalek came. This is in and of itself curious. After witnessing so many miracles, how did doubt ever enter their hearts? However, as we have explained previously, they doubted whether God would remain in their midst after the passing of Moses with the natural order and once there were no more miracles. It was on account of this deficient faith that Amalek came. That is because of the sin of the scales. So this explanation says the sin of the scales is not really like a cheating or a lying one. It's a lack of belief, of faith, right? And Amalek comes as a response of a lack of faith. Okay, so again, this commentator says the connection between Amalek and the fraudulent weights. We analyze the way the sin of the scale works, what the sinner has to be thinking of, and why the response is another nation coming and exposing that and attacks that. Now, we can better understand the connection between the two in the next section. And this next section is going to be an explanation according to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He's going to pull it all together, okay? So far we analyzed a little bit, what does it mean, the cheating of the scales and the cheating of the weights, and why is it such an intense thing? And now let's pull it together. So if you see here on the side of the screen, cheating is not just lust and greed, it is far worse, likened to idolatry, where there is a denial of God. Amalek serves as a justice for this act that disguises itself. Okay, here we go. So this is Corey, when I mentioned your name earlier, is actually referring to here. In general, there are two ways to deal with a thief. One way is to scream and scare him off. And the second one is to catch him, talk to him, and teach him not to steal, right? And this is actually also represents two ways of teaching. The first one is a typical of what we call a Musar approach, which is kind of like, okay, that's just a different approach that Jews use. And the second one represents the ways of Hasidus. So the explanation that we discussed before was the first approach. We exposed the problem, we described it, we condemned it, and we crushed it. Now we're going to discuss the Rebbe's approach. The Rebbe's approach goes a little bit deeper, and it finds a message in this whole concept in general of weights and of Amalek. And even if it may seem somewhat abstract, it actually concerns our fundamental Judaism. So the Rebbe is going to take the story of weights and Amalek, and he's actually going to give us a lesson that can apply to our core Judaism beliefs, our core beliefs in Judaism. And therefore, it will impact us in every realm of our lives in Judaism, not just this specific situation of weights, okay? So the first thing the Rebbe tells us, those of you that speak, know Hebrew, know the Aleph Beis, you can look at the Hebrew for this one. The Rebbe says the word, if you look on the Hebrew, it's in quotation marks. The word Amalek has the same numerical value of the word suffix in Hebrew. If you count up the numerical value of the letters of Amalek and the letters of the word suffix, it is the same. The word suffix means doubt. That is, Amalek casts doubt on one's faith in God and in the sanctity of the Torah. So Amalek is not only a nation that we're talking about, it's not only the physical enemy that attacked us in the desert that we're talking about, we're also talking about the concept of Amalek. We each have the enemy Amalek inside of us. What is it? This is doubt. This is a little voice inside of us that just casts doubt into our enthusiasm, into our belief, into our faithfulness in God, into all of those things. So Amalek is smart. Just one second. Okay. Amalek actually searches for weaknesses and opportunities in order to infiltrate our thinking. It doesn't just come and say, "Hey, don't believe in God." The inner Amalek that we all have inside of our minds actually just punctures little holes inside of our thinking and our beliefs. Are you really sure about that? Do you really have to do that mitzvah? Do you think it's really so important? Therefore, in order to counter this enemy of Amalek, we also have to be a little bit wise and subtle. If Amalek came and said, "Hey, eat that ham sandwich," you'd be like, "No, not interested. I know you're just trying to get me to do it." It's kind of easy, black and white. I mean, obviously everyone has their different black and whites. For someone that might not be black and white. For me, that's black and white, right? If someone tries to tell me, "Hey, this is really good cheeseburger, I bet you never taste it, you should totally try it," it wouldn't even, no, not interested. But if the little voice inside my head says, "No, do you really think God cares if you, I don't know, wear a wig? Is it such a big deal? It looks the same as your hair anyways. Maybe you can just," all those little teeny tiny questions. That's what Amalek really does, right? So we have to be able to be wise into the subtleties of Amalek. It always starts with the little corners and the little gray things that aren't necessarily wrong, but it kind of sets the stage. Okay, let's move ahead and see a little bit more what this means. Okay, the Jewish people are, after all, the children of the Lord your God, and God's people are a part of him. How then is it possible for the evil inclination to convince a Jew to commit a sin? I mean, if we all have a piece of God inside of us, you would think it's impossible for us to do something against God's will. What's the answer to that? It's called the sin of the scales. The evil inclination does not intentionally approach a Jew with the idea of having him rebel, but he just says, put a little bit here, shave a little bit off, a little bit something. He's trying to change the weights. He's trying to balance out the weight system for that person, and slowly he erodes. Slowly it moves with him, okay? So the Rebbe says that basically starts with, okay, the point to this is the evil inclination is able to impact a Jew when he has one weight and another weight, one measure and another measure, one large and one small. That means when his weights are not equal, when certain things in his life have a larger importance than other things. In other words, value system, okay? When your value system is strong and you know what should be big in your life and what should be little and unimportant in your life, doubt has a much harder time coming in, right? The gray areas are not so gray. You're pretty clear on what's important and what's not so important in life, right? The Rebbe says when people lose their belief in God, it doesn't just happen. For example, do you ever know a family that they live in the lap of luxury? They have vacations and beautiful home, but they can't seem to find time to take care of their aging parents. Never a good time. They always, I have to go somewhere. I just did a cruise. And they're just not making it a priority. That doesn't happen overnight, right? It happens slowly. A little bit of a focus too much on this, a little bit of a focus too much on that, and they forgot what their value system was. They forgot how important parents and respecting parents and everything else like that is. And slowly it ends up being that there's just not such a focus on that. So in our personal lives, this also begins when we have a loss of values, meaning when we have false weights, which is what we were talking about in the beginning. When certain things in our lives are big, they're the big weights, and certain things are small. But the wrong things are big and the wrong things are small. Let's see a little further. So there's a story that there was a man named Rabbi Yosef Chaim, and he once came to visit someone's house on Shabbos. And he happened to see a child doing something that's not allowed on Shabbos. And he said, "Oh, wait, Shabbos." Maybe he was playing with something, electric or whatever, something he shouldn't have been doing. And instinctively it came out, "Oh, Shabbos." And the boy's father was like, he's just a kid. Leave him alone. He doesn't yet know the value of Shabbos and its laws. A few minutes later, the same child took a very fancy crystal piece out of the closet and out of the china closet, and the father jumped up. He's like, "Oh, don't touch it. Don't you know how valuable that is? It's not a toy." And the rabbi turned to the father and he said, "He doesn't understand the value of this piece, right? It turns out that both the father and the rabbi had the same understanding that when something's important to you, you need to put your foot down with it. You need to be serious about it. They only had a difference on what was their value system. Okay, move a little further here. The point is, the evil inclination, I'm looking at text 11a, which is on the board. The evil inclination is able to impact a Jew when he has one weight and another weight. Oh, we read this. Okay, one measure, another measure. Look at the next paragraph. Were this Jew, oh, someone have a question? I heard a voice. Okay. Were this Jew able to affect the change within so that he does not have two different measures and weights, his service of God would not be weakened, leaving the evil inclination without any chance of influencing him to indulge in unimportant luxuries, even if they are technically permitted and certainly not in any prohibited activities. So when our value systems in life is uneven, unequal, we put too much emphasis on our job, our fancy, insert whatever it is that it may be in your life, when there's too much emphasis sometimes on the materialistic, the temptations, the societal norms, or whatever it is, and too little emphasis on our souls, then the nation Amalek, the doubt, the voice, has a lot more strength inside of our minds. He has a lot more ability to weaken us inside of us, right? For example, in our world, let's say if we had true value for teachers, this is a problem, I think, all across America for education and for teachers. If the world really valued them, we would respect them and give them the proper pay. We would want to attract the best teachers out there to be educating our children. Because a lot of schools have no problem putting out tons of money for their sports teams and their football coaches and things like that, but not necessarily for their actual teachers. Again, that's just a value system. Being able to afford really fancy cars and designer clothes, then in essence, shouldn't you be able to also splurge on a beautiful pair of tefillin, or beautiful holy books in your home, or a beautiful holiday meal, things like that. So in the next section here, we have when the Torah is telling us in this mitzvah, you should be careful with your weights. Be careful with your measurement. It doesn't just mean make sure you don't have a dishonest scale. Make sure, even though sometimes I wouldn't mind if the scale in my bathroom was a little bit dishonest, if you know what I mean. But kidding aside, that's not what it means here. But when the Torah reads, you should be honest with your scale and with your measuring. It's not telling us if you own a store and you're selling meat, make sure that you're doing it in an honest way. That too. But what it's really telling us is in your weight system in life, in the way you think, in your core value system, make sure your weights are proportionate. Make sure you're prioritizing what really should be big and not prioritizing what can really be a little bit small, right? So here in the next section, the Rebbe actually gives us a few thoughts, like the rabbi likes to say, meditations, a few guided meditations about things that you can think of that helps you realize what's really important. And before we get into that, I want to point out that it also really pertains to the time of life that we're living in. You know, since Corona happened, and we'll discuss this at the end, I feel like the whole world really had to all of a sudden prioritize. All of a sudden, we're like, this is essential, this is not essential. What's really important in my life? What's really making me happy while I'm locked in my home, in my own four walls? And that's when we started to realize, what's our value system? Is it really having the best job that I can run to every morning? Or is it the fact that I can be happy in my home with my family and I enjoy being with them? What's really my value system? And I think that's like a worldwide question that's happening right now. And that really comes along this line of thought that we're learning in this week's Torah portion. So this is just underscoring what we said before here on the screen. Amalek is a gray area, always searching for a weakness that they can exploit. When we aren't solid in our values and in our core value system, it's easy to have wrong priorities. We get distracted, we're human. We have temptations or things like that. So here, the godly soul comes along, and again, this is going to be different like guided thoughts or ideas that you can use to provide a better frame for our value system. So it's just kind of reminds us what's important. Sometimes we need life experiences to remind us what's important. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's tragedies that remind us what's important in life and what's our value system. Hopefully we don't need that. And here it's just different thoughts and meditations that we can have that remind us, what our value system should be and where to focus. So the godly soul comes along and tells the Jew, listen, you ought to know, always remember, and never forget that you are a child of the King of all kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. It is something you were given for which you never had to work. You inherited it as the son of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, or the daughter of Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. By that reason alone, wherever you find yourself and whatever you may be doing, you must conduct yourself as befits a child of the King. This knowledge will not let him do anything unworthy of the king, and certainly not from using the abilities that the king gave him to do something against his will. Common sense alone demands this without any need for hours of profound reflection to arrive at the decision. So that was kind of, just remember, you're the child of God, you're the daughter or the son of the king, you're a princess, you're a Jewish princess, and that alone, you want to uphold your status, so to speak. This, on the other hand, it continues, when it comes to material interests of the animal soul, everyone recognizes, even those who value physical matters, that the body is only valuable insofar as it is in a living body. The body alone does not have its own power. It's not alive on its own. It is only because of the soul that sustains it, that it can have intelligence and that it can think about things, what it can and cannot do. Which, by the way, before we continue, I wanted to just mention that last night and today was mine and Hannah's cousin Hindi's yahrzeit, her second yahrzeit. If you remember, she passed away at the end of the summer 2 years ago. And I actually am in Brooklyn to be with the family. We went to the cemetery and we prayed at her thing. And this really, and so I want the learning today to be in honor of her soul, and her soul should be elevated in honor of this learning. That's number one. And number two, the lesson that we're talking about here actually very much connects, because if you look at anyone that has passed on from this world, and we realize that all our temptations and things that we want and things that we need, our physical desires, our fancy homes, it's all temporary, and it's really our soul that is forever. So if our soul is forever and our body is temporary, then we should automatically focus more on the forever, right? You want to give more energy to the forever. You want to feed the forever more. You want to do what your forever soul wants more than your temporary body. Obviously, like we said earlier, we're human beings and we have temptations. But if we have in our mind our value system and our priorities, that the soul is what really keeps us alive and the soul is really what matters in this world, then automatically when that little voice comes into our head, it will kind of fade away. The gray won't be so gray anymore. Hold on. No way, this one's just in Hebrew. Okay, so obviously it's the Rebbe continues, and I'm not going to go through all the text that you're going to see on the screen, but the Rebbe continues to say that it's true, we have different weights in life. Certain things are more important than others. That's just the way life goes. Certain things we focus on more than others. Not everything is of equal importance, but we just have to make sure that it's the right things that we're focusing on and the right things that we're assuming is more important than the other. Here on the screen, which if you want I can send you afterwards, it just gives you different examples of ways that people can focus a little bit on the wrong thing or in the wrong area. For example, people may tell themselves, you know what, I'll go to shul on Shabbos, I'll daven for a few minutes, and then move on, and then I'll go to my golf and my lunch and my, I'll run my whole life, my canasta, whatever. I'm learning the names of all these games, and and I did my due part, and then I leave my soul alone and I take care of my body for the rest of the week, and then I'll come back to this. Just make sure that our weights are rightfully balanced, not equally balanced, rightfully balanced, right? The feeding of our soul should be constant, not the feeding of our body, and vice versa. And I think that all the ladies that are in this class know this to a large extent, because that's why you're on this class, because we're feeding the soul and we're focusing on what's important in life, and we realize what really counts in the long run, right? So what really this Parsha is coming out to tell us in a practical sense is that we're not talking about a sin of scales. We're not talking about being dishonest. We are talking about, first of all, one message that's totally pertinent is that don't be even tempted to do such things, because that temptation just shows that your trust that God can provide for you completely is a little bit weak. Now, let me tell you, in this day and age, it's tempting. It is tough. It is hard to make a living. It is hard to support families. It is hard to make it in life. And it's tempting to do things, shave a little off here, shave a little off there. But when our core value system and belief is strong, and we know that Hashem is going to provide for us, we won't come to that. That's on the one hand. And on the broader spectrum, the concept of scales really applies to how we approach our life as Jews in general. Just remember what should be the bigger weights. Just remember what should be the smaller weights. And going back to the example I gave of the family that was so busy with their fancy homes that they weren't treating their parents correctly. And I love this explanation. If you go over to these people, this couple, and you say, hey, by the way, you really should treat your parents better. They'd be like, oh, maybe you're right. What does that mean? What does it entail? So you'll tell them you should really visit them more often, be more patient. You're going to have to kind of guide them through step by step. They may be open to it, but every detail that you're going to be teaching them is going to be a new challenge. Like you're going to tell them, hey, you should really visit more than once a month. So they'll be like, all right, yeah, okay, I got to visit twice a week. You should really talk to them more patiently. They'll be like, okay, take some deep breaths. I have to be really patient. They're going to really have to work on it. However, if you work backwards to the core issue and you remind this couple, hey, remember what your parents have done for you. Remember how important it is to respect parents. Remember, and you actually teach them the value of respecting parents and how they should value their parents. Small changes come automatically. And I feel like it's like that with everything in life. Whenever people tell you should really make a change, overwhelming. There's so much that we can do. There's so much change that we need to do. But if we make the change in our value system first, if we prioritize that this change is important to us, the rest of it will come. So really what this Torah portion teaches us is remember what's important. Remember what you value. Take a moment in this world of craziness and remember what is it that's important to us? What is it that we really think is worth pursuing in this world? And that's what we really learn from the mitzvah of the scales in this parsha. And I'm going to just stop sharing the screen for a second. And if you guys have any questions or comments, I will be more than happy.